The year is 1996. Following the release of the second Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, people were thrilled to see what Rare would do next. In a time where Western RPGs were relegated to home computers and Japanese RPGs rarely saw success in the West, their choice to follow up their Donkey Kong trilogy with Dream: The Land of Giants was a bold one. Released right before Super Mario RPG and several months before Donkey Kong Country 3, it combined the beautiful silicone graphics of the DKC trilogy, the humor inspired by Secret of Monkey Island, and the scale of PC titles like Daggerfall, making Dream a defining game in the final years of the Super Nintendo's life. Following a boy named Edison and his two pets, a dog named Dinger and a parrot named Billy, as they fought a gang of pirates to prevent them from acquiring a resource allowing their ships to fly, Dream: The Land of Giants was surprisingly unique. It captured the action of games like A Link to the Past, but it maintained that emotion and the ambience that Rare perfected in Donkey Kong Country, while still feeling like a new title. The isometric environment created an almost cinematic quality about it. It didn't feel like the top-down JRPGs that were so common like Dragon Warrior and Earthbound, and its lack of turn-based combat made it an outlier in its era, and proved that Rare could continue to innovate beyond graphics without reinventing the wheel. Nothing about Dream was particularly complicated. Even its RPG elements, while unique to its console, weren't the detailed experiences in the same way as something developed by the likes of Interplay. It made something that's usually a very complicated experience simple enough to be mapped out onto the 6 or so buttons on the SNES without it feeling like it made technical sacrifices. And with David Wise and Grant Kirkhope working on the music, it rounded off a title that felt like Rare in their absolute prime on a hardware that definitely didn't feel like it was on its way out. Despite releasing so close to Nintendo's foray into 64-bit graphics, Dream received rave reviews, noting fun combat and a unique experience, proving that Rare could do so much more than 2D platformers. One review called it an amalgamation of Rare's influences in a way that feels focused and inspired. Fans of Donkey Kong Country, LucasArts adventure games, and RPGs will not be disappointed. Moving into the N64 era, Rare once again redefined a genre with GoldenEye, and returned to the land of Dream a year later with Dream 2, Treasure of Black Eye, replacing the majority of the fairy tale elements of the first game with a more piratey theme. With a bigger world than its predecessor, more of a focus on character building than Zelda, and still that trademark humor, Rare would once again prove that the RPG was here to stay in the console environment. While it wasn't pushing the N64 to its absolute limits by any means, it upped the presentation value and told a more story-focused adventure with dynamic cutscenes similar to what we saw a couple years prior with Ocarina of Time. But how would Sony respond? Upon seeing the success of not only Dream from their competitors, but their own exclusive Final Fantasy VII, Sony would look to the PC market, scooping up former developers that had entered a decline and having them port titles to the PlayStation. While none of these ports were particularly outstanding, it did encourage developers like Bethesda, Blizzard, and Interplay to consider console ports and exclusives in the future. The C in CRPG now partially stood for console. Bethesda's Daggerfall in particular was successful enough on PlayStation for them to promise console exclusivity for their then untitled Elder Scrolls III game. Rare would continue to blossom on Nintendo consoles, creating what was dubbed at the time as both a Spyro clone and a return to form with Donkey Kong 64. And while it would receive stellar reviews, the setting would be notably similar to what Dream 2 was doing. Donkey Kong 64 featured the titular character rescuing a kidnapped Dixie from an evil witch instead of some variation of K. Rool. With tight controls and fun collecting, DK64 felt like the Rare of old in the new era, and seeing the Kong family return was a fan's dream. While they didn't refresh the genre, they saved their 3D platforming ideas for a good one. And while their other N64 platformers, including DK64 2 and Conker's Bad Fur Day, wouldn't reach these heights, they were still some of the most respected developers of the generation. While they wouldn't return to the Land of Dream for some time, they would occasionally revisit the RPG adventure genre with their GameCube title Dinosaur Planet, which would also receive rave reviews despite being criticized for borrowing gameplay and some aesthetics from the Star Fox franchise. However, the influence both Dream games had on the industry can be seen to this day. The mascot platformer gradually became a rare thing, but not in the pun sort of way, and more refined adventure-focused titles became the new norm. But you probably already know this. Rare and Dream Land of Giants are discussed in almost excruciating detail to this day, especially during the early days of YouTube gaming. And Rare would eventually return to Dream on the Switch with their multiplayer-focused Dream Sea of Thieves, further pushing the franchise towards a fantasy pirate setting. Critics praised the look of the game, but felt unsure about the connection with the franchise. With no Edison or Dinger, it felt like the dream title was provided to cash in on nostalgia. While it did feature Black Eye, its lack of quests on launch led to a dwindling player base within the first 6 months, which in the games-as-a-service model is a death sentence. Was that the line? Did I jump the shark there? Right. Sorry for all the trickery. Dreamland of Giants never came out on the SNES. It wasn't even definitively titled that at all. It was supposed to be Rare's big follow-up to Donkey Kong Country on the SNES. And with what little footage exists of it, I can't help but agree. It's frankly gorgeous. That parallax scrolling, these water effects, oh boy. Someone start a Kickstarter for more indie games that capture the nostalgia of Silicon graphics, goddamn. Edison, Dinger, and Black Eye were very much real characters, and all of that plot stuff is straight from the horse's mouth. And by horses, I mean an interview with developers on Rare's YouTube channel I saw a couple months ago. I tried really hard to not bullshit on the details, but there were a lot more about the SNES version than the N64 version, so I started to just kind of make it up towards the end. Call the cops. I wrote an alternate history video game fanfiction and fudged some details. As the N64 console quickly approached, they moved it up a generation naturally. And while I know a lot of this footage is seriously early in development, it's almost criminal how bad it looks with traditionally rendered 3D graphics instead of those chunky silicone graphics. A lot of the pirate stuff did become the focus the further along in development the game went, which was pretty cool. And when Rare developers saw how unbelievably dated their isometric game would look compared to the cool as heck Mario 64, they realized that maybe they should try something else. And so, Edison was out, and in came Banjo, a character that was already going to be included in the N64 Dreams in some form. How much of Dreams' design ended up in Banjo-Kazooie is a little unclear, and what the gameplay would actually entitle is also unclear, but we can speculate pretty hard. In some interviews, I found them saying things like this.
I certainly remember playing lots of Japanese RPGs at the time. Some of the LucasArts point-and-click adventures, which I really liked as well, so we kind of thought we could kind of make a combination of those games and give it the Rare flavor.
Making me certain that it would represent the current state of computer games in a time when those types of games weren't really possible or popular on consoles unless you count things like SimCity and Pilot Wings. And so I just kind of ran with it. Rare was absolutely at the top of their game and immensely influential. If they decided to do something, it was safe to assume people would be watching. While DKC isn't necessarily this ball of innovation, Donkey Kong fever at the time was real. Rare never shied away from experimenting in other genres, even to this day. And while they aren't the powerhouse they once were, it's interesting to think how the industry would change if a Dream came out instead of Banjo. Would Donkey Kong 64 still feel tired? Would the PS2 and GameCube generation have the same focus on mascot platformers? Would Rare have sold to Microsoft? Their unique and not volatile, but not volatile position makes their history feel poised to be changed by minor events, and maybe those minor events lead to Rare being like Insomniac or Naughty Dog, developers who are still crafting interesting and memorable experiences in the modern era. But we'll never know, and all I can do is write a thinly veiled speculation video like it's fact on YouTube. Hey, thank you so much for watching. This was a lot of fun to do, so if you have any opinions on how the industry would be different if Banjo didn't come out, let me know down in the comments below.